Hello everyone and welcome back. So previously in the channel I shared quite a few techniques on creating clips of different styles, but I never created a step-by-step guide on how to do the modeling, the displacement maps, the baking, and then bringing everything into Karma to do the final rendering and doing the procedural shading also. So in today's video we will be going through that step by step, from generating the geometry with Heighfields, creating the displacement maps, the necessary utility masks for procedural shading. And yeah, this is not the most exciting clip, but it will show you a few ideas on how you can create such models. So yeah, let's get into it. So let's start by dropping a geocontainer, and right away I'm going to create an height field and define the dimensions. So drop an height field, and this will be quite big. I'm gonna increase it to 2000 by 1200, so something like this. And now there are plenty of ways of generating clip shapes. For this one I chose to use geometry and do a night field project, so we will need to do quite a bit of a setup in this case. But let's start. So we have a night field that has these dimensions, so it makes sense we start to scatter some geometry on a similar size. So let's create a grid, and in this case I'm gonna set it, let's focus and set the size to 20 by 12, so it has the same aspect ratio of the height field, and then in the end we can scale it up. I'm gonna increase the rows to 256 and the columns to 128 to have some geometry to play with, and then we will scatter some points and instance some geometry. So what sort of geometry we will instance? Well, let's start with some platonic solids. If you want a more defined shape, a more art directable shape, you want to place geometry manually and whatnot, but in this case I'm going to do almost everything procedurally. So I'm gonna start with this platonic, which will be a tetrahedron, that's the name. Then I'm gonna duplicate and choose isochahedron, and duplicate once again and use a dodecahedron. Let's see, dodecahedron. So we have these three shapes. Now we can select them and press Alt and drag, and we will merge. Let's make sure we clip the bottom part, so clip, and we can just clip everything and clip on Y. Let's create a connectivity, and on points will be fine, and we have a different ID for each geometry. So that's one part done. Now we need to do the scattering. So for that I'm gonna create a mask to scatter in the middle. It's not strictly necessary, but I'm gonna follow what I did so we get a similar result. So I'm gonna get the unshared point and create a mask. So unshared, and now let's do a distance along geometry. And I'm gonna pick the unshared and check out the mask, and we get something like this, but I need to play with the values. In this case I increase this to maximum distance, and I'm going to invert the mask. So I want to create a mask in the middle so I can scatter only on the middle and control that. So I'm going to invert this and bring this value to something like, I'm gonna use the value I previously had, but you can just say 4 or 5, something like that. So that's fine. And this will be the mask. Now we can scatter, and we will scatter based on the mask. So as you can see, we limited the area where it scatters. I'm gonna probably play with the seed, and in this case I just want 100 points, and I have a global seed of 27. And I'm not going to use relax iteration, so we have something like this. Let me see if that looks something similar to, and I guess it does. Then I also want to remove some points from this because I don't want this uniform shape, so I'm gonna do an attribute wrangle, and I'm gonna say if the rand of the ptinum, and I will use a seed, so channel integer. I like to use integers as seed, and if that is smaller, so rand ptinum channel seed if that is smaller than a threshold. I'm going to remove some of the points. So in this case, we need to close in here. And we don't need to open the brackets. We can just say remove point 0 I at btnum. So if rand I at btnum, oh, we need to remove this one. And now if we create this and increase the threshold in this case and play with the seed, so I'm gonna set a seed of 7 and a threshold of 0.6. So something like this. So this just removes the points based on the btnum, the random number. And now we will create, we already have the connectivity. So if we actually copy these 2 points, it will copy everything. As you can see, it will copy all the shapes. So I'm going to use an attribute from pieces and connect this to the connectivity. And in this case, I'm going to choose class and make it random. And in the copy to points, I'm going to use a piece attribute and it will be class. So as you can see, it will copy a random shape to each point. We can play with the seed to see which shape is copying. And in this case, what sort of seed did I use? So 2.48. And now I want also to play with the scale and the p scale because this won't generate a nice shape. So for that, I'm going to use an attribute adjust float, and I'm going to use a p scale. In this case, I'm going to set it to noise, a mean value of 0.2, so it doesn't go too low. And for the noise settings, I'm going to decrease the element size. You can play with the values, I'm just following here something. And then I'm going to duplicate and just use this as a global control. So in this case, I'm going to set it to constant. And I'm going to increase this a bit more. So just increase this a little bit, as you can see. And now I want to play with the scale, not the p scale. I want to affect the y scale and so on to have more randomization. So for that, I'm going to just use an attribute randomize. And I'm going to change this to scale, and if we have a look at this, we will have now different scales, but in this case, I'm going to set the scale. So let's just make sure we reset everything, and now we can increase the X scale and decrease the Y scale to 0.2 and 2. As you can see, we will have some going higher than others, and I'm also going to increase the Z scale. So something like this, and now we can play with the seed. So if we come in here and play with the seed, in this case I'm going to pick a value of 1.4. Let me see if that looks anything close, and I guess it does. So we have everything we need. Now let's just get rid of the visualization, and now we can do the Heighfield projection. But as you can see, our Heighfield is much bigger, so I'm going to match size this to fill the Heighfield. I'm going to set the justify y to min so it stays on the grid, and I'm going to also scale to fit and choose a value of 1500. So oops, and let's see. Yeah, that looks like it. And now we can just do a Heighfield project. This looks like nothing right now, but in a bit it will look a bit better. So as you can see, now we can distort it and play with different Heighfield nodes, and it will look a little bit better at least. So let's do that next. So now we will start to play with the Heighfield nodes. It won't be too much work because most of it we will leverage from the displacement map, but let's shape a bit this Heighfield. So I'm gonna start with a mask expand, and instead of expanding the mask, which is the default behavior, I'm gonna expand the height, and I'm gonna set a value of 57. And as you can see, it will expand into these square shapes. This will just help to fill in the gaps. Now I'm going to do a Heighfield blur, because I don't want this blocky shape, so I'm gonna blur it a little bit. In this case, I chose a value of 52. So we have something like this. Now I'm going to play with a Heighfield distort, in this case by noise. Oops. and we have this sort of result. So we need to play a bit with the settings. In this case, I'm going to choose an amplitude of 115, and of course we need to change the element size to be quite big. And now we can play with the offset and have a different result. In this case, I chose a value of 2000 something, and we get this sort of shape. And you can pick the side you want to render. In this case, I believe I chose this one or this one, I don't remember, but we will see in a bit. So, and now is the time where you can play with the seeds and get a different shape, as you can see, and also play with, we have plenty of seeds we can play with. So in here we can play with the height, we can play with the p-scale, we can play with the random pieces, and you get a different result. And like I told you before, if you want a more art directable, or you're replicating something from reference, you want to place this geometry manually, but I don't want to go through that trouble and just show you a more procedural approach. So what can we do in here? So basically we have the cliff done, and the next to create the detailed geometry, we will use instead triplanar mapping, like I showed before in the channel. So let's just convert these height fields, and we're basically done here. We will have UVs and whatnot, but I don't care about these UVs because I'm gonna change the geometry quite a bit. So now I'm going to clip this bottom part because I don't want this extra geometry. So I'm gonna clip, and along the Y, and I'm gonna choose a distance of 2. So we have this geometry, as you can see. Now I want to as you can see, this geometry is a bit, although it's quad, is a bit stretched due to the elevation. So I'm gonna remesh it a little bit, so when I use the triplanar displacement, it will work a bit better. So, but if we feed this to a quad remesh, we will use the Houdini's new quad remesh. If we feed that, it will have a lot of geometry and it will get slow. So before that, I'm going to use a polyreduce. So polyreduce, and I'm gonna set this to 10. We will use these details, but I don't care about them, so that's fine. You can always reproject the details after, but I'm not too worried about that. So now we're going to quad remesh because this geometry is not that useful. So I'm going to use a quad remesh. I have the exoside, it will work better, but in this case, quad remesh from Houdini, it will be fine. I'm gonna set it to 50,000 and increase the decimation level so we can avoid some problematic areas. Let's see if that doesn't take too long, and it didn't, it's instant. And we have a nice quad remesh, as you can see. It will work fine for these sort of scenarios. Let's create a null. This will be our base. And from here, we still want to work on we want to generate UVs from this, but for now, let's do the triplanar displacement. So I'm gonna subdivide this. And for now, let's just do 1 to be faster, and we will increase it in a bit. So we want to use the triplanar displace, and let's do that. Let's see, in this case we need to increase the displacement, let's say to 10, and it will start to displace. But in this case we don't want to use the displacement because this will create all sorts of issues. Mainly I'm going to use the Megascans displacement maps, and the range of those maps are between negative and positive values, so we need to offset it a little bit to work properly. Otherwise we will get this bulging effect, which I'm not too fan of. So instead we will remove this displacement and use color, and then we can displace in a point value. So I'm gonna choose here a displacement map, and I'm gonna paste it in here. If you are curious about which one it is, you can use this code in here on the Megascans bridge tool, if you still have access to it. I'm gonna decrease this, and I'm gonna play with the texture scale to about 0.01. We get something like this. And now we can also play here with the offset and change that, but I'm not going to worry about it. Just in case, I'm gonna show you something in here. I'm not sure it's too useful, but let's do that anyway. So if I increase this to 20, as you can see, this will have an axis blend. We have this attribute axis blend, but it doesn't work for the color because it's not configured that way. But if we open this, so allow editing of contents, and go in here in the point VOP, we have here the exponent, and we can just, instead of having a second exponent, this is for color, we can just call it the same exponent, and now it will use the same in here, so the same setup, and now we can play with the axis blend and it will work on color. So just, I'm not going to play with it, but just in case you want to play with that attribute, that's also useful. So we have this triplanar displace. Let's copy and pick a second map, because I'm going to blend quite two maps. And let's see which one will I use in here. So I'm gonna use this layered cliff and decrease quite a bit the scale to 0.05. And I'm also going to play with the axis offset, and in here 0.7. And as you can see in here, I'm going to play with the axis blends to blend a bit better the texture. It will just help on the corners and whatnot. So now we can do the displacement since we already have the textures. So for that, I'm going first of all to create some normals on the points. And it's always nice to attribute blur the normals so we can avoid some intersections. In this case, I'm going to pick normals and blur it quite a bit so it has an easier time displacing it. So 100 is fine. And now let's do a point VOP. It will be easier to do it in a point VOP than Vex. So I'm gonna copy these two maps, and we have CD. This is on the CD, as you can see, CD attribute. And here we have the same CD, so we need to import that. For the first displacement map, so the color, we have here the CD, but for the second we need to import point attribute, and from the second input, and we want to import the CD. Let me see, what else did we do in here? So now we need to composite. So I'm going to create a composite, and I'm going to mix the first CD with the second one. And if we have a look at that, it will look the same. We need to use, in this case, I'm going to pick overlay. So it will mix both maps, and you can decrease the influence of the second map. In this case, I'm going to choose a value of 0.8, which will be fine. Now, before we displace this, we need, as I was saying, we need to fit the range of these maps because they are between -0.5 and 0.5. So, and I don't want a vector, I just want a float. So I'm gonna do a vector to float and pick the first channel. And then I'm gonna fit range. And I'm gonna pick between -0.5 and 0.5. So I believe that's what I did. And that's fine. Now, we don't want to apply these everywhere because it will look awful. We need to apply where it makes sense, so where we have high elevation. So for that, I'm going to pick the normals in here. I'm going to create a procedural mask, so vector to float from the normals. In this case, I'm going to choose the Y, and also I'm going to fit range, and we can start to play with the range in here to create that mask. So in this case, I chose a value of 0.776, and also decrease this to tighten the mask. In this case, 0.87. And right away we have a mask for the vegetation, so we can bind export. Oops, bind export. We can create an attribute right away called vegetation mask. And that's done. And now we need to invert this mask to create the cliff areas. So for that we can just use a complement. So from here we can do a complement. And now we can just multiply. So if we look at that, it will just invert the area. And now we can multiply our displacement map with that complement. And as you can see, it will look something like this. And finally, we can displace this. So displace along normal, and we can feed this. We can do something. We can create a constant, set it to 1, and feed it to the color. And now we can do the displacement, so amount, and connect this to the P. Let's make sure we recompute the normals, otherwise we won't see anything. And in this case, I'm going to increase the displacement to the placement scale to about 10. You can promote the parameter, but in this case, I'm going to just use it like this. And now we get the displacement. It's looking nice, but of course we need more definition. So for that, we will need more resolution, more subdivisions. We will work on that in a bit. But for now, we will create another procedural mask. So my idea now is to create a layering mask along the cliff, so we can darken the bottom areas in a gradual way. It's not strictly necessary the way I'm going to do it, but it's always a nice trick to know, so I want to show you how to achieve that. So I'm gonna create a relative bounding box, connect the position to the position, and let's do a vector to float and get the Y component. Let's connect that to the CD. So as you can see, we get this gradient from bottom to top. But I don't want this. You can totally use this one, but I'm going to use a layering system. So for that, we need to multiply this. So if we multiply, in this case, by a constant, which can, and you define the amount of layers you want. In this case, I want 8. Then we can round to integer. So round to integer, we get this, and now we need to divide it again. So divide to get the correct range, and we divide by the same amount, and we get this sort of result, which in my opinion, it will add a bit more life to it, and it's a nice trick to know how to do these operations. So let's also displace a bit the... So if I look at the flat shading, as you can see, it's all flat, so we can displace it a bit with a noise. So let's do a turbulent noise, and we want to connect the position to the position. Let me see what sort of values did I use in here. So in this case, I'm going to pick, let's right away choose a 3D noise and a 0 centered offset, so we can displace up and down. And let's do an add to see what sort of results we get. So nothing much. In this case, I'm going to pick an amplitude quite high, and as you can see, the size is too small or too big. We can just decrease that to 0.18, which was the value I used, and you can see we start to displace the... You can play with the size of the noise. You can also play with the roughness and whatnot. So it just displaces a little bit the mask, which is always nice. So I think we have everything we need in here. Let's just output this mask. So we can connect this to the CD to remove the color or to set it to white, and we can bind export, and we will bind export these to layers. So now we just need to increase the resolution of this. Let me see. I think I used about 4 subdivisions. If your computer can't handle it, so if I increase this to 2, this should be pretty fast. We start to get more resolution. Let's have a look at 3. How long did that will take? So this will be enough. But in my case, I'm going an extra step. So I'm going to set this to 4. It will take quite a bit longer. So let's see if that doesn't take too long. And from here, and I'm also increasing the resolution quite a bit because I want to extract some procedural masks like curvature and ambient occlusion, and without the resolution we won't get such good details, let's say. So as you can see, we have quite a lot of detail, and you can always change the sort of maps you are using and get different results. I went for this layered look, but that's totally up to you. So as you can see, this is our cliff shape. And now we will do some operations to this. In this case, I'm going to measure the curvature to get the convexity and concavity maps. Let me see. Before we start to calculate, I'm going to increase the multiplier to 5 to have more range. And we can disable the visualization. This will take a little bit, so let's see. So that took about 30 seconds, so it's a little bit, but now we should have the concavity, which will look something like this, and we have the convexity. I'm not sure how much of these I will use, but it's always good to have. Now I'm going to create a physical ambient occlusion, and I believe it's default settings, but I'm going to use dirt built up, and I don't want to visualize the output, and let's calculate that. So that one was pretty fast, and let's look at that mask. So AO mask, and we have this sort of result. Now we will need to do some more masks, but for now let's file cache this. So I'm gonna call it cliff base cache, cliff base iPoly cache, just so I don't have to recalculate this again. And I'm gonna make sure I don't have time dependencies and save to disk. And there we go. Now our viewport is too slow, so if I do a Control T, it should be should be a bit better. In this case, it's not. Let me try to reset the viewport. Oh, okay, now it's a bit better. I'm also recording, so that's why it's too slow. But now it's a bit better. As you can see, we have quite a few polygons, 12 million polygons. But don't worry, we won't render this geometry, it's just for extracting a displacement map. So let's do a point swap and create a few more masks. And we should be done with this. In this case, well, we will just create one mask in this case. We will use unified noise static, connect the position to the position. Let's create in here in the not the offset, the frequency. We will create a constant, just middle click in there. And in this case, I'm gonna choose, let me see, what sorts of values did I use in here? So in this case, I'm gonna pick, I'm going to stretch the noise. So I'm gonna use 0.1 in X and 0.1 in Z. And I'm going to multiply these. So multiply constant. And I can play with the size. Let's just connect this to the CD and see what sort of values we get. Let's turn this. And what kind of noise did I use? In this case, I used a Worley Cellular F1, and I picked an offset of 60. So let's do 60. Can we do? So that's fine. No fractal, and I think I also fitted the range. So let's do a feed range, and I can play with the values in here. So in this case, about 0.118. And I'm also going to play in here with this multiply constant, which in this case I use quite a low value, so to increase the size. This is just a detail mask, nothing too crazy. This will just help us to bring some more color to our cliff. We could possibly multiply this with the inverted vegetation mask to have just on the cliff areas, but I'm not going to worry because we can do that on shading. So I don't want to connect this to the CD. I want to export this. So find export. And I believe I used in here vertical noise. So that's fine. And I believe that's all. So we could probably have done this before. So let's actually do that. And let's cache it. Will this recompute? No. So let's see what we have. We have the ambient occlusion, we have the concavity, convexity, layers, vegetation mask, and vertical noise. So we have quite a few procedural masks to play with. And in the next step, we will take care of the UVs and the base mesh for these, and also the baking. So now that we have the iPoly, we need a base mesh and to bake all the maps. So let's just create in here a null. And I'm gonna call this out cleave iPoly. And now to generate the base mesh, I'm going to go in here to this null and create in here a branch. Create another null. And we have this base mesh that we can play with, I guess. So let's do the UVs. We could probably use a UV flatten in here, and that will work fine, I guess. Let's see. But we might have a few problems. So instead I'm going to do in a different way. So I'm going to scatter a few points. Now I'm seeing I have an issue in here. Let me see if I have that on my original mesh. So in this case, I don't have that issue on my original mesh. So why is that? It's coming from the... So we have a polyreduce. This quadri mesh, did I change anything in here in the quadri mesh? So why is that giving me a different result? I used a clip of 2. Reduce 10% is giving me a different result. Why is that? Let's play with the decimation level. So let's set that to 4. And we don't need to recompute this again, but maybe I will do that. So I just recomputed everything. And now we should not have that issue in there. I don't know why that happened, but let's just actually see the difference. So not much difference, but I didn't need to do that, but just in case. So it's caching again, and that's done. So let's look at this. And now we will scatter a few points on the mesh. In this case, I chose 32 points. This will be the amount of islands you have. I'm going to increase the relax iterations and these settings to really have a uniform distribution. So that's fine. Now I'm just going to do an attribute wrangle. And I'm going to take advantage of the near point function to create a class attribute. In this case, I'm going to call it. So I at near point will be equal to near point 1, the current position. Let's see what that gives us. Should have a primitive attribute, and now we can do the UVing based on this attribute. So for that, let's do a for each named primitive, and we can change in here to np. And we should iterate over each island. So let's do single, and we have everything working. And now we can just do a UV flatten in here. This will be a bit better. And in this case, I'm just going anti-manual layout. Let's look. We can probably compile this, but I'm not going to worry. So let's do a UV layout, since these UVs right now are all over each other. So if we do a UV layout, we should have them layout like that. I believe I played a bit with the offset of the islands, so the padding. In this case, I'm going to pick apply padding between islands and spread islands to all the available space and pick a padding of 10. So if we look at that, we can start to introduce some padding, so we have some space between islands. Now this geometry is disconnected, so we can actually fuse it, and we should have a look in here, and it's fusing. Now we can soften the normals, and we can cache it. So file cache, and in this case I'm going to call this cleave phase low poly cache, and I'm going to save it. And we have the UVs, and now we can do the baking. So let's create a null, and I'm gonna call it out cleave, which will be the geometry we'll use. And now for the baking, we can use the labs maps baker. This is a very buggy node, but in the end it does the job. But usually this crashes Houdini, so I will probably have to open this file again, but let's have a look. In this case, I want to subdivide a bit this mesh so I get no artifact. That's my experience. So I'm going to subdivide this twice. to have a bit more. Otherwise, I will get a few shading artifacts. That's my experience. So I'm going to subdivide to smooth out those artifacts. Connect this to the low resolution, connect this to the high resolution. And let's have a look at this. Make sure we enable this visualize. And the distance is too small. We probably have displacement that goes higher than this. So I found a max distance of 8 will work fine. We can disable this. And now let's name this. Let's render this to the render folder. And I'm gonna use here a name called Cliff. So Cliff demo underscore channel, and that's fine. I'm going to use 4K. This will take a while, but that's fine. For the displacement, I'm going to use an EXR, which will be the range between -1 and 1, and we need to adjust that on rendering. And I'm also going to render all the other maps. So in this case, we need quite a few. So we need, in this case, 6. So 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to pick concavity. Oops, what have I done? Concavity. Oh, concavity. Convexity of the layers. Then we have the AO mask, the vegetation mask, and finally the vertical noise. So that should be all, and this will bake the high resolution details and masks to the UVs of this low resolution mesh that we will use for rendering. Now let's spray and save and hope this doesn't crash Houdini, and I will be right back. So we just need to hit render and it will start to think. So that finished and also crashed my Houdini session, so I'm just gonna make sure it saved out the map. So I'm gonna create a cop network and create a file, and I'm gonna go in here to the render, and we should have here we have all the files. So let's have a look at that, make sure we reset the viewports, and this is in the range between -1 and 1. So let's make sure we set this to mono and we do an equalize. We should have the map working. So yeah, it looks like we don't have any issues. Let's also have a look at other maps, what we have in here. So the vertical noise, that's working. Let's look at the layers, that's also working. Convexity, yeah. Concavity, now it's not opening, okay. And also the AO. So everything is working. We should be good to go to move into Solaris. So we have everything ready. So let's copy this out cliff and move into Solaris. Let's go to Solaris. Hopefully this will not crash, and create a sub import. I'm gonna call it cliff base. And I'm going to import that out cliff, not the iPoly. So we should have this low or mid resolution mesh. And I believe I'm going to render this side, so that's fine. Let's press D. I'm gonna make sure I render viewport size. Background can be dark, and I don't want to display the environment map. And right away I'm gonna create a material library and the render geometry settings, like karma render settings. I'm gonna change this to XPU. That's fine for now. And what else? We also need a dome light. I'm not sure which map did I use in here. So you can pick an HDRI from Polyheaven. I have a custom one in here, so let me see if I can find it. So in this case, I'm going to copy from here. I believe it's an HDRI from Grayscale Gorilla, and I'm also going to rotate it a bit so we can actually render this. So let me save and hit render. It's not compiling. Oh, that's fine, we don't have shaders. And let's rotate this to 150. So that's fine. That's the sort of look I'm after. And now let's right away connect the displacement map. So let's go to the material library, Karma material builder. Am I recording? Yes. Cliff mat. So I don't like uppercase, cliff mat. And let's remove this input, create an image, material X image, load it as a float. And we can pick here the height. Let's do a remap. And we want to remap it between -0.5 and 0.5. And I believe that's all. We just need to connect this to the displacement. And we will have to do quite a bit of a setup in here. So let's connect to that to the displacement and see how it looks. So let's hit render. And oh, of course we need to assign the material. So let's autofill and assign. Let's see if we can see. We will have this sort of viewport bug, but it should render fine. It's compiling. Okay. As you can see, we are generating the... So let me make sure. Is the cliff demo? Yes. And also I want to increase the resolution of the displacement. So in this case, I'm going in here and go to dicing, set or create. Let's set this to 1. And we should have quite a bit more resolution. Let me make sure I set here the specular to something high and pick a more gray value. And let's look at that again. So we have quite a bit of detail. Let's maybe increase it a bit more. So 1.5 to see if we can get some more detail. And that will be the resolution I'm going with. So that's fine. Displacement is working. And now we will do the shading. So this will be quite a few steps. So bear with me. Let me see where it makes sense to start with. First of all, I'm going to use the Karma triplanar nodes, so X-style triplanar, and I'm going to pick a texture from Megascan. So if you want, if you want to have a look, is this code? You can paste it on the bridge app. So in this case, I'm going to use a convert to convert this to RGB only. I believe I used that. Let me see. Yeah. And let's mix it with another triplanar. So we can copy this. We will first mix the vegetation and the cliff texture. We will just use two file textures in this case, or two triplanar textures. So I'm gonna pick the second one and I'm gonna place it in here so I can follow my file. And in this case, I'm gonna pick this one, which will be a grass texture. So just copy this code in here if you want to have a look at it. Now I'm gonna create a mix. And as a mix, I'm going to load an image, which will be the vegetation mask. So vegetation mask, that will be our mix. As the foreground will be the vegetation, and as the background we will use the cliff. Let's connect this to the base, and we will have something like this. Of course, we need to play with the scale. Don't pay too much attention to the viewport shading, because that's always a bit buggy. So we have quite a big mesh, as you can see. This is like 1 kilometer wide, or 2 in this case. So we need to play here with the size. I'm gonna pick a value of 300. And I don't want any random rotation. I want this to be quite uniform. And I'm also going to play with the triplanar blends, so about 0.3. So it blends a bit better the corners, and you can play with the seed. I'm gonna pick 1 in here. And the rest, I guess it's fine. Now we need to play with the grass. In this case, I'm going to pick the same triplanar blend, so about this. Can pick a seed and change the size to 100. And we have this sort of result. And now my graphics card is screaming, I'm not sure why. But let's hope that doesn't crash our session. So we have the displacement, we have the vegetation mask working, and now let's work on some color correction. So first of all, I'm gonna change the hue of this grass texture. Let's have a look actually at how this looks. And it will of course compile, it will take a while. So I'm gonna pause it. So it didn't take too long. So we already have something, but it's of course too dark. So let me just make sure. So first of all, I'm going to color correct this vegetation mask. So where is color correct? So color correct. And I'm going to increase the exposure quite a bit. So these two, and of course it's compiling. Let's increase this to 2.5. And I'm also going to play with the saturation, so I'm going to increase it to 1.1. And I'm also going to play with the hue, so I want a more green value. Let's see how that looks. We could probably remove the displacement so it doesn't have to calculate every time, but I'm gonna leave it. And we will also cover this grass texture with vegetation, so we don't need to worry too much about it. Now let's also color correct our cliff. So I'm gonna pick a color correct. It's not connecting? Okay. So let's see. In this case, I'm just going to increase the exposure to about 0.85. So that's fine. Now we need to work on those maps. So for that, the first thing we're going to do is to introduce the let's see, the layers mask. So let's load in here. Let's duplicate this one and pick in here the layers mask. I'm gonna play with the range. Let me see if I can follow this properly. Yeah, that's correct. Let's play with range, and in this case I'm gonna create yet another color correct. And I'm gonna place this on the gain. So we're going to mask the gain with the layers mask. So as you can see, it's darkening quite a bit the bottom. I don't want this much darkening, so I'm gonna play with the range. So in this case, I'm gonna reduce this in the outside to about 0.51, in high 0.51, and I'm gonna increase the low to about 0.2. So it doesn't dark that much. As you can see, it's doing this radial darkening. And I'm also going to make sure I clamp it, otherwise it can create some issues. So now we will introduce a map that is going to make quite a big difference, I believe. So let's actually drag this and let's disable this for now. And let's load another 2 of these and make sure we default this. And in this case, I'm going to load the AO mask. And I'm going to mix. So I'm going to mix between this texture and a color corrected version. So color correct. And I'm going to mix that with the AO mask. So let's have a look at that. In this case, I'm going to place it in the background in here. Let's have a look at that. And in this case, I'm going to increase the exposure of the second map where the AO mask takes effect. So if I increase that to 3, you can see we start with a bit more life to the cliff. You can see we have that ambient occlusion shining through. Although it's too much, we can play here with the range. I'm just going to make sure I clip it. And I don't think I changed in here anything else. Now we can create yet another layer of detail. So in this case, I'm going to load again a map, which will be the concavity. So we have here, let's see, do we have it? Concavity, yes. And the range is fine. And let's get some space in here. Oops. And let's see, I believe I'm going to mix again. So I'm going to create another layer, create a mix, put this in the background and do a color correct. Again, using the same idea, so color correct. But I'm not going to color correct this one that is already too changed to color corrected. So I'm gonna pick from here, so from the original texture. So I'm gonna use this one and connect it as the foreground. And as the mix, we're going to use the concavity. Yeah. So let's mix this in and let's connect it to the background. Let's hit render. And we need to change quite a few things in here. So let me check in here. So in this case, I'm going first to play with the range. So I want to, let's increase this color correction just in case, just so we can see the effect. So I'm going to decrease the gamma. And that is not shining through. We can actually visualize this by pressing X. And let's change the range. In this case, I'm going with a value of 0.239. I just want to contrast this mask a bit. And 0.563. So just those values in there. In this case, I can increase it a bit more. But let's keep it like that. And now let's see if we play with this color correct. I'm going to play with the I'm gonna first play with the saturation, so I'm going to increase this to 6. I'm gonna make sure I decrease the gamma. I increase the gamma. And we should start to see some green shining through. But I guess we don't have the range. Is this the concavity? So let's make sure. Concavity. And am I clamping? Yes. So why is that not showing through? So I'm gonna make sure I place this on the foreground. Let me just see something in here. So let's have a look at this again. I believe I need to increase the exposures so that takes effect. So let's increase this quite a bit, something like 6, and play in here with the range. So yeah, that's basically it. Play again with the range. Let's actually decrease that and increase a bit. And now we can play, of course, with these exposures to something like 4. And make sure we change the color. Let's set this to 5. And maybe play a bit more in here. So this will be a bit different from my file, because in this case I'm not getting this result. So let's do 3. Let's do 2. And decrease the saturation to 4. And let's see if we can get a green color in here. So something like this. Let's decrease the exposure. So yeah, we start to have some green in there. That's fine. Let's move on. Now we're almost there. We just need a few more. We just need one more, which will be the vertical noise. So in this case, we just want to have another color correct. so a lot of color corrects. So let's do a color correct. Am I recording? Yes. This is taking a long time. I hope you're still with me. If you're still with me after all this mess, you can leave a comment below. And now let's duplicate again these two nodes, because we will load now the vertical noise. So we used almost all of them. So in this case, I'm gonna load the vertical noise. And I'm going to default this. And in this case, connect this to the background. And I'm gonna play with the exposure in here. So let's see what sort of values did I use in here. So let's actually render this. We could probably have removed the displacement from the render so we can work a bit faster, but let's leave it like that. So we're not seeing that, so we need to decrease this and we start to see that mask. This just adds another bit of detail, so we can play with this in I to decrease or increase the effect, and I guess something like this will work fine. So I guess that's basically it, and now we just need to do the scattering of the grass. So to finish it off, we will do the scattering. So for that, I'm going again to the object level, and I'm gonna create a geo in here and call it assets. Assets, and I'm going to load an alembic. I'm going to load some grass geometry from grass walls. So I'm gonna show you which one. So is this one in here? So you can search for it. It's free, so that's fine. And now let's create a null. We just need this and nothing else, and we will do out grass. Let's copy this, and let's see, we have a path. So for each, if we do a distribute, left align and distribute, we should have these 5 variations, and I guess that's fine. Maybe we can do an enumerate in here, and in this case we will do string and call it piece. So we should have an index for each path, but let's see if we will actually use that. Let's go to Solaris, stage, and let's start with a component geometry. And let me have a look in here. We will need to object merge that in. So component geometry. And we will do an object merge and load in the grass. Let's reset the viewport. Oh, I'm not seeing. So we have the grass. Now we need to blast to isolate each variation. So a quick way we can do that, since we have that index attribute for each grass, we can do a blast and do, in this case, delete non-selected and do at index, oops, not this, index will be equal to piece, and use the geo variant index, geo variant index. That will play with the variants in Solaris. We will use that in a bit. Oh, so sorry, this is uppercase, geo variant index, and that should give us something like piece 0 something. We need actually to add a component variants, so geometry component variants. I believe we need 5, if I'm not wrong. So now is creating that. So geo variant index, that should do it. Now we can just use a bound as a proxy. So let's connect a bound in here and use this as a proxy. And if we do an explore variant, but before that we need an output. So geo component output. How is it called? Output, component output. Let's call this grass. And if we do an explore variant, we should have all the instances. Let's do side by side, use bounds, explore variants. So if we look at the final render, we should have all the variations, as you can see. So let's do duplicate and at origin. And why is this? Again, I need to set this to dark. So now we will do the instancing. So let's create an instancer, connect this to the first input, and let's create the instancing. So let's dive inside and do an object merge, and we can merge in the cliff. So we can take it from the stage or the object level. In this case, I'm gonna pick the object level. Let me see in here. Now, before we do the scattering, we need to create some density masks for the scattering, so it only scatters on the vegetation part. So for that, first of all, I'm going to create an attribute noise float. I'm gonna call it density and have a look. And in this case, I'm going to decrease these, I believe. So I'm gonna play with the element size to 70, play with the offset, something like this, and I'm also going to increase the amplitude to 3. Now I'm going to load in the vegetation mask, so we can do attribute from map, and in this case, let's disable the visualization. I don't want to use CD, I want a float, and I'm going to call it vegetation mask, and I'm gonna load in the vegetation mask, so not red, so this one. Now we can mix both attributes, so attribute composite combine. I believe that's the node I used. So I'm gonna create an attribute in here, and I'm gonna call it density scatter, and I'm going to load in first the vegetation mask. So let's have a look at this, the vegetation mask, and load in the density. And in this case, we can set it to multiply. So I'm gonna set this to multiply. So we have something like this. Let's create a normal, and I believe on points. Yep, on points. So we can orient the grass later. And let's do the scattering. So scatter. In this case, I'm going to pick the density scatter, and now it's only scattering on the parts that make sense on the vegetation. And I don't think I used relax iterations, yeah, to be more randomized. And I'm going to set this by density and set this to 0.1 for now. We will increase it later, but for now let's keep it like that. Now we need to play with the p-scale, so let's set it, attribute adjust float, and it will be p-scale by default. In this case, let's see, p-scale. We will set this to a noise to have some variation. And I'm going to play with the element size, of course, so about 25 to have this big and small grass. We can play with the offset, and I'm also going to have more high values than low and increase the low values. So in this case, I'm gonna set the high value to 1.5 and the low value to 0.7 something. And we can play here with the range. So if we set this to auto, we can visualize the range a bit better. Now we can duplicate this, and let's do, instead of noise, let's do constant, and we can play with the final size. So in this case, we can set this to multiply and set this to 12. This is the final size of the grass. Now, in order to orient the grass, we need to play with the normal. So let's have a look at the normals. Can we visualize it? It's quite a bit small. Let's make sure we don't visualize the p-scale. And in order to randomize the rotation around y, I'm gonna do here a small wrangle. This is the almost the only bit of x we will use. So I'm gonna set the vector up to be the normal. And I'm gonna set the normal to be the cross product of the up and the up value along y. So if we look at the normal, it should be pointing in the, and we can also normalize. And that should make a difference. So it's pointing sideways. And now we can do a simple, let's just increase the normal size, so scale normal. Now we can do an attribute adjust vector. And I want to play with the normal. I want to change the direction, rotate, and along the up. And if we rotate, we can randomly rotate. And as you can see, it's oriented to the, if we also visualize the up, it's oriented towards the geometry. In this case, I'm gonna set this to random and between 180 and 180. So now we can play also with the seed, and we will have this randomized rotation. Let's see if I have something else. I don't think so. We can also add a noise in here for shading. So let's make sure we don't visualize this. Let's do an attribute noise float. I'm gonna call it seed noise, so we can play a bit in shading. Let's visualize it. And in this case, I'm gonna change the scale quite a bit. So in this case, set it to 50. And we can possibly play with the offset. And then we can come back and change this. Let's make sure we create an output. That's always important. And now we should have this working. And we don't, because we need to set in here in the instancer. So it's loading. In this case, I want first input, and I want to load the explore variants. So explore variants / grass and everything. Now it should work. And as you can see, it's working. Oh, we need to set this to preview, of course. Am I doing something wrong? First input, that's correct. Let's make this manual and reset the viewport. Click again. Make sure we don't load the render. So preview, why is this slow? This shouldn't be slow. So I see it's loading the other mesh inside. Let's make sure we are setting only to preview. So final, preview. And now I don't know why the hell. Let's reset. Let's create another scene view. And it's still loading the full geometry. Why is that? So let's load final render and preview. Did I make something wrong in here? So bound. It should have the proxy in there. So geometry variant. It's probably on the... I believe this is a bug actually, because it's loading the geometry in there. So is the explore variants? Probably. So let's do explore variants and do... let's do duplicate variants. I don't know why he's loading that iPolymesh. So preview, this should be working. Is the explore variants? Probably. So let me have a look if I change anything in here. Duplicate variants. I just use the same settings. So I'm not sure why in the world is creating that problem. So I need probably to restart Houdini because this is an issue. So final render, preview, and it's loading again the same mesh. Let's reset the viewport and let me load Houdini again. So reloaded Houdini and that fixed the issue. As you can see, now we can switch between final render and preview and we don't have that issue. If we do the instancer and look at now, it's only loading the proxy. So that was an issue. Now we still have the original mesh in here, as you can see. So we need to prune the original geometry. Since we just want this won't make difference because it's at the world origin, but just in case, let's prune these grass primitives. That is fine. Now we can just create the material library and do an assign material because I don't want to preview the final texture. And let's also do a switch to enable and disable this instancing. It's always nice. And let's see, we can load from here. Let's organize this and load these in here. So let's do a merge. And we should have this working. I need to reset this again, sorry. So now we need to do the material. I think I'm just going to copy from here. In this case, let's build it. Yeah, let's build it. So let's create a Karma material builder and call it grass mat. Am I still recording? Yes. Let's delete this input and create an image texture. And I'm going to load the albedo. So in this case color, and this is the albedo for the grass. I'm going to load in as a float. So the roughness, now which one it is? I need, is the 4K, I guess. Let me see. Yeah, the 4K. We can connect this to the specular roughness. Did I connect that right? Yeah. This to the base color. Let's load in the translucency, so it needs to be a color. And load in the translucency 4K and not the red, so that's fine. Let's do a color correct. Connect this to the subsurface. Oops. Let's move this out of the way. Let's connect this to the subsurface again. So subsurface color. And we need to increase this subsurface, let's say 0.5, and make sure this is thin walled. It's fine. Let's duplicate, create a reference with Control Alt Shift and drag and move this because I want to apply the same color correction to the base color and to the translucency. And let's keep like that for now and play with the color correction settings later. So let's assign that to the grass. Let's see if that doesn't break. We could probably create in here a USD preview material. I'm gonna change this to be something like this. Load it and assign in here, oops, to this, and material path will be the preview material, and I'm gonna set it to the purpose to preview, and let's assign this to everything. So that way we don't have a preview of that material. And we can do the same for the cliff, but I'm gonna leave it like that. So let's have a look on how this looks. Hopefully this won't crash. Let's look at this side and have a look. So as you can see, by default, the grass will be way too dark. So we need to go into the material. In this case, I'm going to increase this exposure to 2.3. We start to see something, but probably we need to increase the density. So let's go in here, play with the density. Let's pick 0.5. And now it's working a bit better. We could probably, let me see. We could probably play with the color of the grass. So we have that noise that we created in the points that we can load in here to affect certain areas of the grass. But honestly, I'm not going to worry too much. Let me see. Let's try that actually. So let's do a geometry property value. I believe it's called seed noise, is it? And let's do another color correct. Can do just in here and play with game. Let's see if that loads in any way. Is it seed noise that I called it? So let's have a look in there. Yeah, seed noise. And I probably need to play with the range. But it's not loading, is it? Seed noise. Let's have a look. Let's press X. And it's loading. But we need to play with the range, so let's do a range. And let's contrast the noise. So this takes a while, so let's contrast this. Now we start to see a bit better. So we can increase the low so it doesn't darken as much. And let's increase it a bit more. And we can play until our art's content, but again, this has taken a lot longer than I expected, but hopefully you guys enjoy this one. Let's maybe play with the U, and you can also load a map to play with the U, but I'm not going to worry too much about it, as you can see. And I also want to play with the P scale, so let's go in here. And in the first, let's increase this a bit more to have clear patterns. So something along those lines, maybe not so much. And of course we can play in here. So let's set this to 15. And we have a different pattern. But maybe that's too much, so let's go with 30. And yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this one. You can grab the file on my Patreon alongside with exclusive tutorials. And if you enjoyed this one, please make sure to support me on Patreon. It's always nice. And you can have a look at different tutorials I have in there. I also have exclusive courses and all the project files from my videos. So yeah, with that, I finished this. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments what you think. And I guess I'll see you next time. Thank you.